This week, the world is reeling from a tragic loss, the loss of a giant of a man, a person who was a leader, a teacher, an inspirer, a person who addressed so many different issues so proficiently, who had the language and the communication to lift up Jewry and, in fact, humanity. We speak of the loss of Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, and I thought it appropriate to share an insight of his relating to the life of Abraham, of Avraham, about whom we read this week. Abraham was 137 years old. His life seemed to be in ruins. He had just suffered such trauma. The son whom he prayed for and who was miraculously given to Abraham and Sarah in their old age, whom he loved so dearly, this son he had to take up the mountain and sacrifice him and end his life. And Abraham was ready to do so. And just at the last minute, God says, "Stop, this is not my intention." And Abraham returns from the mountain after experiencing such a traumatic experience. And immediately after that, he suffers the real loss of his life partner, the woman whom he loved and with whom he had built his entire world. Sarah passes away. How does a man of 137 years old deal with such trauma and such loss? And we would understand if Abraham would be angry, would be frustrated, would be depressed, would turn to God and say, "You promised me so much, God, and yet my life is falling apart." But what in fact happens next in Abraham's life? We read two verses. The first that tells us that Abraham came to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. But immediately after that, Vayakom Abraham, and Abraham rose from his grief. And then suddenly a flurry of activity. He now wants to find the practicalities of where to bury his wife and to purchase a burial plot. And then immediately after that, he turns his attention to his son Isaac to find him a wife and to help build his future. How does Abraham have the energy, the strength, the ability to confront and overcome all of his grief and loss? Loss of his wife and almost loss of his beloved son. Where did he get the resilience from? And Rabbi Sacks talks about the Holocaust survivors who became mentors to all people in their moments of loss. He speaks about the Holocaust survivors who never ever talked about their past, not to anyone, not to their wives or husbands, not to their children. They did not speak at all. What did they do? They set about building a new life. They moved to new countries. They learned the language. They learned the customs of those countries. And then they found work, and they built careers, and they built families. And only decades later, 30, 40, 50 years later, they began to speak first just to their families, and then to all around them, first in just a trickle of words, and then an avalanche of sharing the tragic moments of their past. Abraham set the precedent for this. He taught us that first we need to build. First we need to look to the future and to create that positive future. And only then can we really mourn and redeem ourselves from the tragedies of the past. Rabbi Sacks talks about Viktor Frankl, who was himself a survivor, who experienced the horrors of Auschwitz and emerged from it and began to teach other survivors how to rebuild their lives. He taught them to focus on the future, to find some calling, some task that only they themselves can do, to concentrate on that and to actually build what it is they are potentially able to accomplish. In fact, it is Viktor Frankl who is the reverse of Freudian psychology. The Freudian psychology taught the individual to try and look back to the earliest moments of childhood, to get to the root. It was Viktor Frankl who taught about looking to the future, looking how the tomorrow can be filled with promise. And he didn't just teach it, he lived it. He emerged from the Holocaust, he built his school of thought, logotherapy, which began to impact on the lives of millions of people and all of those who read his outstanding book, Man's Search for Meaning. So Abraham, whose life was so seemingly in ruins, he taught us, he was the precedent. It is about going forward with commitment, with resilience, with building, with an idea that the future is able to promise more. He didn't cry out in anger and in anguish. He didn't turn to God and say, "Why am I a victim, and how could this be done to me?" He heard a voice inside of himself that said, "The next step depends on me." Abraham taught that we first build the future, and only then can we really mourn the past. These are the words of Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, who taught all of us so many things about life. We mourn the loss of this great man, and may we take his teaching and apply it. May we continue to build as he would want us to. May we bring the purpose of Hashem and fulfill it in this world. And if we are successful in realizing our future, we'll be able to redeem ourselves from our past. Have a wonderful Shabbos.